Adam Carroll, thank you so much for coming back to us on the ThinkWise podcast. We're excited to hear more bits of wisdom and insight from you today, my friend.
I'm excited to be back. You guys, we had so much fun on the first episode I was on. This is just a blessing and an honor to be back on with you guys.
Yeah, this is great. Well, as we've mentioned before, you and I have our history goes way back, and both of us have spent a lot of our lives and our careers building a network. We share a network. And, one of the things that people say around a network and your relationships is it's not how much you know, it's not what you know, but who you know. And I think that's partially correct. I don't know that it's totally correct. I think that there's a lot of people that know a lot of people, but they aren't necessarily known and respected themselves by a lot of people. So, my preferred way to say that is it's not what you know, but who knows you. So with that being said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the power of a network, what role that's been in your life, and give us a little bit of insight from your perspective on all of these things.
Yeah, I have long been a fan of the saying that your net worth is determined by your network. And the way that I sort of modeled that or used that phrase to my benefit is I started studying the idea of influence on others, and specifically Robert Cialdini's work, the book Influence, and very specifically a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was written by Dale Carnegie in the 1930s, and to date is still the second best-selling book of all time. Next to what, guys? Do you know?
Gotta be the Bible.
Second best-selling book of all time.
The Bible, yeah.
50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, come on.
Just kidding. It is the Bible. It is the Bible. That's the Bible. And then it's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And then I'm pretty sure it's either Harry Potter or 50 Shades. I'm not sure which. But I read that book and it was like a baseball bat upside the head for me, because essentially the book itself, and I encourage all of your listeners to grab a copy of this and read it. The book basically said this: if you want to make more friends in less time, be interested, not interesting. Just be interested in people. And I took away from that this idea that I just needed to be immensely curious about other people. And somehow miraculously, I became one of the most interesting people in the room because I was just super curious about other folks. And I think deep down in that, number one, it makes them feel good about themselves when someone else is interested. But number two, the more I learned about other people, the more I realized how common and in similarity people were with their goals and their desires and their aspirations. And then I just started putting those people together, and I became what I call a super connector, which is essentially someone that's like, oh, you want to write a book? My friend wrote a book. Let me put the two of you together. And by and large, what happens is when you do that enough, you create a ton of social capital in your network, and you can then go ask them for virtually anything and they'll give it back to you because you've been so gracious and generous with your time and network.
Yeah, I think that's great hearing how your approach to networking is just as much to connect other people as it is to connect yourself to people. And one thing I really wanted to bring up was I feel like a lot of people my age are not so much scared of networking, but the idea of networking kind of makes them cringe. They feel like they have to go and put on a show and have a certain face and a certain tone of voice. And I think that's having a lot of focus on being interesting. And the way you phrase that, saying to be more interested than interesting, I think it's a great way for young professionals to enjoy networking more and treat it more as I want to go learn as much as I can about these people, and hopefully we'll find a connection.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a massive distinction, I think, Christian, between what you're describing, where you're going out and like have to put on the game face and have to, like, I'm not going to leave an event till I have 10 business cards kind of mentality. And a good friend of mine said he approaches it differently when he goes to a networking event. He's a youngish guy. He's 28 to 30, somewhere in there. He said, all I want to do is meet 3 people. Every event I go to, if I meet 3 people and I have a really legitimate conversation with them and I find out some details about them, I'm good. I'm out the door. And he feels like that's a success for him because the goal isn't quantity necessarily. It's quality of the conversation and getting to know someone so that, you can send them a note afterwards and say, I really appreciated the conversation about how you got to where you are and what podcast you're listening to. And, the big project that you're working on. If I can be of assistance, let me know. Those are the kinds of touches afterwards that make networking not feel icky. And it's more like, oh, this is genuine. This is for a reason. And it's just to make sure that you get what you want in life.
Yeah. Well, I love that you use the word curious.
That's good.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I love that you use the word curious. Like being curious, remaining curious has really become one of my favorite words, one of my favorite attributes. And I think it's one of the ways that you build relationships well. And it's so hard to consistently remain curious. My relationship with my wife that's my most important relationship. And just yesterday, we were catching up. I had a work project all weekend. I had a different project the week before that. We were apart for a long time, so we were reconnecting for the first time in a long time. And I was just verbal diarrhea, me. And she looked at me, and I was done. I was like, done. And she looked at me, she's like, are you going to ask me any questions about me? I was like, well, no, I was only thinking about me. And so, relationships are important. I would love for you to just talk about that, because if our network is our net worth, that's important, but relationships and true relationships are critical. So maybe talk about that from your perspective.
Well, my grandfather ran for the governor of the state of Iowa, where I live, back in the 1970s. It was before I was born, but I heard lots and lots of stories about his campaign and what he was all about. And for reference, you guys, in the 1970s, he was running on a campaign platform that he was going to legalize marijuana, prostitution, and gambling. So if that gives you any indication of where he might be on the political spectrum. He did not win in the primaries. The guy that he went up against one of the most popular governors the state of Iowa's ever had. So it's a good thing he didn't win in the primaries. But my grandfather was this very gregarious, outgoing, super extroverted guy who had more deep relationships than anyone I've ever known. And he had them with every level and member of society, from the upper crust to, people that he would meet in public that were super down on their luck, and he'd invite them to the house for dinner, and they'd become great friends. And then he'd have all of them together at parties, all hanging out. So he was a natural relationship builder. And he would always tell me, listen, you don't know how something that you've done or someone can help another person until you find out about them. And so I think from him, I realized the power of being curious. And to this day, I've thought a lot about, what tattoo will I get when I finally put a tattoo on my body? And I think I want to get be curious on my forearm. So it's just a constant reminder. And not that I need much of it, because I'm a pretty curious person, but I love asking people questions that they would never think to ask themselves. And I'll give you guys an example. When I'm building relationships with people in the short term, like I'm at a party and I'm meeting folks. Number one, no one wants to be asked about work. Generally speaking, no one wants to talk about work. So what do you do for work? They'll say, but they don't really want to talk about it. But if you say, hey, you look like a traveler. Are you a traveler? Oh, I do like to travel. What is your very favorite vacation you've ever been on? And they'll go on and on and on and on. And they'll be like, who is with you? And how did you guys choose the spot? And should I go there? And if I do, what should I see? They will, just like Richard did with his wife, they'll go on and on and on and on about themselves. And it's amazing, because I learned so much about people that way. Or I'll ask, hey, what's a huge project you're working on you'd love to have done by the end of the year? And they'll say, it's funny you ask. I'm writing a screenplay, or I'm writing this song, or I'm working on this backyard project that I have. And then I just go into asking them more and more about that. And the interesting thing that occurs is they will say, I feel like I've known you forever. And I'm like, well, that is interesting, because all I'm doing is asking you questions about yourself. And you are more than willing to answer them. But what I feel like is a friend, because I'm interested in what you're interested in. And I think that's the biggest key to building great relationships is we like to do business with people who are like ourselves. And so when we find a similarity or commonality, we got to dig into that and explore that a little bit together. They'll ask you a question or two if they're a good conversationalist. But again, going back to how to win friends and influence people, Dale Carnegie said, your goal should be to have an 80-20 conversation or a 70-30 at the most. They talk 70%, you talk 30%. So at if any point in time you're going on and on, flip the table around and just say, I feel like I'm talking a lot. Tell me more about your trip to New Zealand. I want to know more about that, right? We flip it right back over to them. So in answer to your question, Richard, I think the whole idea of relationship building, A, is super important. My granddad taught me that. And B, give the other person the talking stick and watch your relationship grow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so good. I think, like, would you say even to a college student who's maybe going to like a formal networking event where it's like you go in there, you're dressing nicely, everyone's kind of like speed dating, but for jobs, like, would you still recommend like ask those personal questions? Or do you think a lot of times those people kind of just want to get to the point and be like, look, I'm hiring?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there is a big distinction, a difference between people who go into a networking event looking for a gig and people who go in looking to informational interview. And one reeks of desperation and one suggests I have lots of options and you're just one of them, right? So I've done this program. It's called Your Successful Career Launch on college campuses all across the country. And what I tell students is, listen, the goal is to find, if you're looking for the job, there are lots of companies that probably have the job for you. So go informational interview those 3 or 4 different companies that have the job, but go about it in a way where you're literally in inquiry. Hey, tell me more about the company. Tell me about how you found it. How did you get to where you are in the company? Hey, what kind of groups and organizations and clubs should I be a part of? What trade magazine should I read? And an interesting thing happens as the person is answering all these questions. In the back of their mind, they're going, wow, Christian is very inquisitive. We need innovative, inquisitive people. We don't need just some rule follower that doesn't have a good work ethic. It seems like he's got a great work ethic. And they start making judgments about you because you're asking really intelligent questions, and they'll move you to the top of the pile, as opposed to the kid who's like, here's my resume and here's what my GPA and here's what I've done in college. And it's like, me. Look at me, I'm interesting, versus I'm really interested in you and the job and how you got to where you are. It's just a way different profile of candidate. So again, go have 3 or 4 of those really solid conversations and walk out knowing you're going to get an interview out of those deals.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, do something that separates you. Like as you're explaining that, Adam, what I'm thinking is that's no different than talking about the New Zealand vacation. You know, I'm being curious about the company, about the organization, asking that person, why do you work here? Why do you think it's great? What does this company offer that other ones you've worked at don't? And you're creating and building that rapport. In the day and age here of easy networking through being connected on social media or having lots of connections on LinkedIn. I remember at one point when I was on LinkedIn, I wasn't going to connect with anyone on LinkedIn that I couldn't explain my personal connection and story about.
Yep.
That didn't last long. And what's the Dunbar number? It explains the total number of relationships that any one person can really manage at any one time, somewhere between 100 to 200, depending on your capacity. So I would be curious, what is the number of people that should be in your inner circle, or that you could really realistically have in your network? So you might have 2,000 people on Instagram or LinkedIn, but what's that look like size wise, do you think?
Yeah, great question. I have long been a fan and a proponent of this concept. I don't even know where it came from, if I created it or if someone else did. So if I'm borrowing this from someone, all intellectual property is due to them. And if I came up with it, then it's mine, and you guys can trademark every statement from here on out. I have this idea called the Power 100 list, and it's the 100 people in your life that like, love, and respect you. And the reason that I go to this, I was doing some research for a program that I used to do called Networking Power. And POWER was an acronym that standed for promoting opportunities while establishing relationships. So we all have networking power. The idea is that we build social capital within our relationships. And social capital just means that I can call Richard because he and I have known each other for so long. Or let's turn the tables. Richard could call me and say, my son and I are starting this podcast and we want you to be on it. I'm like, done and done. Let's go. This sounds amazing. That's social capital, because he may not be able to just call anyone and ask them to be on. I don't know what your relationship with Warren Buffett is, but I don't know if you could call Warren and just have him on the show.
Yeah,
that may take a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So there's social capital in our relationships already. And those people that we have social capital with want us to achieve what we want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And deep down, I think that we are actually all hardwired to help one another. So I do this example, this exercise around this when I'm doing a program in person. And I'll say, Christian, you might be my audience member. And I'll say, hey, Christian, can I get your help? And what would you naturally say?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do you have a $20 bill on you? and most of them are like, yeah, I do. And can I see it for a second? And then they give it to me and I stick it in my pocket. I'm like, thank you. That's awesome. And then I walk away. And my point is that we are naturally wired to help. They didn't ask, am I going to get this back? Do I get a return on it? And then usually what I'll do is I'll pull a 50 out of my other pocket and hand it to them and say, hey, thanks for trusting me. But the idea is that we are naturally engineered to help one another. And what young graduates do is they immediately go to LinkedIn and Indeed and some job finder app board, they're trying to look for a gig on, and they will send their applications in through those places, or they'll go to a massive networking event and their resume goes in a stack of resumes that never may see the light of day again once they leave that event. When in reality, what they need to do is send one email to their Power 100 list, the 100 people in their life that like, love, and respect them, who are at all different areas of their career and all have 100 people in their network who like, love, and respect them, which immediately makes your network 10,000 strong. And when you send that email out to the Power 100, you say, hey, my name is Christian. I'm soon to be graduating from this program with this degree. The job that I'm looking to attain is in this field, ideally with this company doing this kind of work. If you know of anyone who could help me get a foot in the door at any one of these 3 companies, I would be forever in your debt. An email that goes out to those 100 people, you'll get somewhere between 18 and 25 responses back like that within the week. And they'll say, oh my gosh, my neighbor works for such and such, or I do have a friend that's in that industry. They may be not directly related, but they're indirectly related. And then all you have to do is chase down all those leads, get your foot in the door of the company, and bam, you're inside. And you're now in a stack of resumes that's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 deep, not 300 deep, because the HR person went out to a career fair and just collected sheets of paper. So this Power 100 idea is really, really powerful if young people use it and they continue to build their Power 100 over time.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think the biggest thing is that just shows initiative. And like, I think a lot of times young people think like, oh, I have this network. They think that they're whatever 100 people on LinkedIn they have are just going to help them when it looks like they need help. And sometimes all it takes is just a quick, like, I'm asking for help here. I'm going to be transparent about that. I need help. What can you do for me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you the way to make sure that they are there and willing to help when you need it is send them things here and there throughout your college career, maybe in your junior and senior year. Send them a couple articles, send them a TED Talk that you saw that said, hey, I was thinking of you. I watched this TED Talk. It's amazing. You send it to them. And some of the listeners out there may be like, well, how on earth would I do this? It seems like it would take a lot of time. But if you start an account with MailChimp, and MailChimp is an email service that you can set up a free account and you can upload a list, like a Google Sheets list or an Excel spreadsheet, like a comma separated values spreadsheet, upload that into MailChimp. You write one email, send it to your Power 100 list. And when you hit send, it will say, Dear Richard with the text, Dear Christian with the text. You can see who opened it, who's read it, who's clicked through the links. And now you'll know who's really on with you on this Power 100 list. So send them a little bit here and there that's of value before you go and ask them for things, but know that they're there when you need help. They desperately want to help you.
Yeah. Like an hour before we got on this call, I spent an hour on a phone with the son of one of my good friends, helping advise him on his career. And when we were done, he's like, what other advice, would you have for me? And I said, listen, I don't need this, but the 20 other people that your dad set you up with, because I know your dad, they're going to want to know your progress on this. And what happens is people ask for help and they see it as a one-way, like they consume the goods and move on. Even if it's 2 weeks down the road and nothing's happened, let those people know, because they're invested or they wouldn't have spent that hour. And it really is, it's disingenuous and it's unkind to go ask for and take that help without somehow letting people know how their help is helping you. So here's the next question for you, Adam, that we like to talk about, the postures and the gestures that are required for success. Yes. So in this case, a posture is the mindset, the approach, the way that you need to show up, and the gestures are the actions that you need to take. So, in your mind, what are some of those postures and mindsets? And then what are some of the actions needed to move this from, by birthright, people have 25 people on that list. You're awake, right? You're alive, you show up, you got 25, but it's the next 75 that you need to go get. So in order to do that and do it well, what are some of the postures and some of the gestures to be successful?
That's great. And I love this notion, postures and gestures. The postures that I took, there's probably 3 or 4. One is the realization that everyone's looking to help in one way, shape, or form, everybody, that we are naturally wired to do that. A second posture is this idea of networking power, that if we are really going to build a substantial network, then our goal should not be to ask, hey, who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? How long have you done it? Do you have family? Those are the 5 questions we typically ask. I decided that if I was going to promote opportunities while establishing relationships, then the thing I needed to do was find an opportunity that you have that I can connect you to. So the way I would do that was I would ask different questions. And the posture for me was, people will say, you ask really out of the box questions. When I meet someone for the first time, I'm literally like saying, hey, what are you super passionate about? If you won $1 million tomorrow, what would you do to give your life meaning? And folks are like, no one's ever asked me that question before. I'm like, I know, it's crazy, isn't it? We should all be asking these questions. And A, it's interesting. I'm memorable as a result. But B, what they'll say is, I'd go dig wells in Africa. I'd go climb Mount Kilimanjaro with my family. I would go set sail on the Indian Ocean in a sailboat. And when I hear those things, that's an opportunity. And I can promote that opportunity. So if someone says, I'm going to go sailing on the Indian Ocean with $1 million, I'll go back to my office and I'll research sailing cruises on the Indian Ocean, cost, how much is it, when do they happen? And then I'll send a person that link that I just met. And I'll say, check it out. You don't even need $1 million. You need $12,500 and 3 weeks vacation. And you could go do this. So what are you waiting for? I'll go with you. Let's do it. Let's set up a time and let's make it happen. And when I do that, like I'll laugh, put a smiley face, winky face. But the next time I see them, I'm like, hey, how's the Indian Ocean thing coming? And they'll laugh and go, well, my wife doesn't want me to go. Or, well, I've thought about it. And some have said, case in point, I had one group that said, oh, I'd love to skydive. And I was like, what are you waiting for? There's a place an hour away from here that does it. And the next time I saw them, they said, you'll never guess what I did. And I go, you went skydiving. I saw it on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Right? So now I have something that I'm encouraging them with. So postures, back to postures, it's the idea that I'm asking different questions. The third posture that I have is that my Power 100 list doesn't know that they're on my Power 100 list. My goal is just to give selflessly and expect nothing in return. Mm-hmm. This is not I scratched your back, you scratch mine. This is Zig Ziglar's advice of, if you help enough other people get what they want, you can't help but not get what you want. So those I would say are my top 3. Now here are my gestures. When I connect with people for the first time, I'm going in with a fair amount of research about the person. So I know, like Christian, to your point, if I'm meeting someone at a networking function or I'm going to a job fair and I know I really want to get into Google and I really want to get into, Intel and I want to get into Boeing, I'm going to do research about those three companies and I'm going to know what was talked about on their 10K call, their CEO call that happens quarterly, because I listened to the last one just to get some insight. Maybe I go follow a bunch of people on Twitter, but I'm going to back up my questions with like, hey, I listened to the quarterly call and your CEO said profits were down last quarter. What do you make of that? And they're going to go, dang, this kid's done his research, right? So I'm going to ask out of the box questions. That's a gesture. Secondly, and this is to Richard's point, when I meet someone, I'm going to do something out of the ordinary. I'm going to write them a handwritten thank you note right after we're done talking, and I'm going to send it to them so they get it the very next day. Now, the way I do this and the way I would encourage your listeners to do this is order custom thank you notes with your initials on them. And you can do it through Vistaprint or I'm sure you can do it through Canva these days, but get a customized thank you card. And it just classes up who you are, how you are. But I have friends that will write a handwritten thank you note to at least 5 people a day, every day. And these guys, they could ask anyone for anything and they'll get it, right? Because there's tremendous power in that, doing just something a little bit different. And then last but not least, I add these folks that I meet into my Power 100 list. And I'll say to them, hey, I have this thing called a Power 100 list. They're the 100 people in my life that are very influential. Would you be willing to be on it? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. Or they'll say, well, what does it mean? I'll say, from time to time, I'll send you an email telling you what I'm up to. And if I can help any of your friends, I'm more than willing to. And if I have someone that might be benefited by knowing you, I'd love to be able to introduce them if you're open to it. And again, 7 times out of 10 in this case, they'll say, absolutely. I have a couple friends who will say, check with me before you do an intro, depending on my schedule, but by all means. And so the gesture for me is constantly building a network of people that can help me get where I want to go and what I'm doing. But I don't abuse any of that. I go in selflessly going, I'm just here to help. So I'm going to help connect the right people. And from a posture standpoint, I have the right mindset. And from a gesture standpoint, I have the right systems in place with the thank you note, the Power 100 list built, and a MailChimp account that I'm sending emails out of. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing I'm hearing throughout this whole conversation is the idea of selflessness. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people my age have with networking is they've got the wrong mindset and they think it's all about what can they go get out of this. And if they're going to go make themselves feel uncomfortable, they better be getting a job or something out of it. And I think if people can just adopt that mindset that you're purely going just to learn more about other people and give to them, eventually that's going to come back around to you.
It absolutely will. Can I give an example of how it has?
Yeah.
So I was a college speaker for a long, long time. I would go out and I would speak on college campuses. And I would say I've been on probably 750 college campuses in the last 15 to 20 years, everywhere from Florida State University on the East Coast to the University of Spoiled Children on the West Coast. Y'all know where that's at? So at each one of these schools, I would ask the students, hey, how much will you have in student loan debt? And the number one answer I got was, I don't know. I have no idea. And I'd say, best guess. And they're like, I couldn't even usher a guess. I have no clue. And what I saw was this need for young people to be educated about the student loan process. And so I had this idea one day that I wanted to do a book because that had been my business model. I was going to write a book called Broke, Busted, and Disgusted, True Tales of Student Loan Borrowers. And I would go interview a bunch of young people. I'd write their story and then I'd publish a book about it and then go speak about it. And a good friend of mine by the name of Calvin Johansson, he and I were having this convo one day and he goes, oh, dang, that would make a killer documentary. And I said, yeah, you're right. It would. I don't know the first thing about making documentaries. And he says, yeah, me neither. Let's do it. And so we decided we're going to do a documentary on student loan debt. And I didn't know how much it would cost, but I knew it was going to take something to do the production, do the editing, buy the intellectual property for music and copyright and all that. And in the end, I was going to try and self-fund the whole thing. And then I started digging into the Power 100 list and my friends and my network. And I thought, what if I just try it? I'm going to send an email out. I haven't done a big ask of my list in a long time. What if I just send an email out and say, I'm embarking on this project. I would love to know if I could get some help from some of you. And we're going to crowdfund this thing. If you believe in me and you believe in this project, would you donate to this crowdfunding campaign? And you guys, in sending out my Power 100 list, which is now about 270 people, sent out an email, and we raised $12,000 in 4 days. And over the course of 45 days, we raised $67,000 to fully fund a documentary project on student loan debt, which we completed in about a 1.5 years time. And then we ended up selling the documentary to CNBC and a bunch of credit unions. And it's now being shown in high schools and colleges all over the country.
Wow.
So when I talk about the power of this, it was our network that led CNBC to our door, because we sent out an email saying, hey, we want millions of people to see this, but we feel like the only way to do that is to get commercial representation. And we got an email from someone in our list that said, oh, my so-and-so has contacts at CNBC. You should meet them. So we get on the phone. They watched the trailer and then the documentary in full. And they said, hey, we pitched this to our people at CNBC. They're interested. And away it went from there. So you never know how powerful the message you want to get out can be until you put it out to your network. And some of them are like, I'm going to take that and I'm going to amplify it to the masses. And when you do that, you realize just one small, this is like the butterfly effect, right, Richard? A butterfly flapping its wings in South America can change the weather patterns all over the world. That's what happens when you leverage the Power 100 list.
Yeah. Well, as a person who is on your Power 100 list, who got that email, who contributed to that crowdsourcing, when I saw that on CNBC, and I don't know if you remember this, but I took a picture of my TV watching that. I'm like,
yes,
that's not just my buddy, Adam Carroll. Like, I was a part of that, you know, and that ownership, like people want to be tied into this, and the world, like we want to be known, we want to be needed, we want to be in relationship. We don't want to be far and distant. We want to be close. So this is, I think, I don't care if you're 85 or you're 18 years old, this has been a very powerful conversation. And so to close us out, Adam, we're all about taking action here, turning our great ideas into action. If you were to talk to our audience and say, all right, gang, here's one thing, just one thing to do to go build your Power 100, to grow your network, to add value to other people's lives. And you're an overachiever. So if you want to give us 2 again, that's fine. But what's the 1 or 2 actions that you would encourage our listeners to take right now to move forward in this?
Well, number 1, from a gesture standpoint, go open a MailChimp account first and foremost, and do it with just whatever your personal email is. Don't use a school, a .edu address. Use a Gmail address, whatever your first name, last name is, or whatever you have. And then build your Power 100 list in a Google Sheets. And the easiest way to do it, you guys, is first name, last name, email address in columns, and then plug all that data in. And it's okay if you only have 50 right now. It will grow over time, but get to a point where you build it to 75 to 100 or more, and then upload that into MailChimp and just start hitting your list once a quarter with like, read this great article, thought of you, enjoy. And then as you get closer and closer to graduation or changing jobs, then reach out and say, hey, I'm looking at changing careers. I'm thinking about this. Would you know of anyone who works in this industry for this company? If you could give me an intro, I'd be forever in your debt. Those 2 steps alone, and getting curious, right? Asking good questions and including people on your Power 100 list. Those 2 steps alone could change the trajectory of your life forever. Okay. But I want to give one last, because now I'm on my 3rd one, but this is a good takeaway. One of my good buddies said, what if you wrote at the very bottom of your email, just below your signature line, double dash lines, and you said, one of my big dreams is to blank. And I put at the bottom of my signature line, one of my big dreams is to one day grace a TED stage. If you know someone that could help me do that, I'd be forever in your debt. And I put it in big, bold red letters. I sent out those emails for weeks and weeks and weeks. About maybe 7 or 8 weeks after changing my signature line, I got an email from a friend of mine who said, I'm on the curation team for a TEDx event. You were the first person I thought of. Why don't you come deliver a TED Talk? Not 3 weeks later, I got another email from a different person saying, I'm on the curation team for a TED event at the London Business School. I'd love it if you came across the pond and delivered a talk. So when we ask for what we want, it's amazing how the universe responds in kind. And we don't know how many people out there want to help us, but they want to help us.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so cool hearing not only just your ideas, but how your ideas have impacted your life directly. It's really inspiring. One more question. Where can everyone find you, and where can people find the documentary as well?
Yeah, so the best way to find information on me, go to adamcarroll.info. That's 2 R's, 2 L's, Adam Carroll, not Adam Carolla, but man, I wish I had his podcast. Adam Carroll, 2 R's, 2 L's .info. The podcast is there. The documentary is there. All my books are there. And you can find out more about me at that site. So thank you for asking, Christian.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming on. This has been a great conversation. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Adam. The world is better because of you, my friend. We'll talk to you again real soon.